Hello, I am Patty Corbett Ward. I would like to welcome you to Learning Thursdays 2017. Before the presentation begins, I would like to make you aware of a change in Learning Thursdays for this year. 2017 is the year of ethics, and as such is the focus of our Learning Thursdays, in that each month will offer a core concept of ethics as developed by the OASAS Counsel's Office. It is strongly recommended that all participants avail themselves of all 12 presentations, and Trish Allen will offer more information during the presentation. As a side note, there will be months where 2 Learning Thursdays presentations are offered, as there are other presenters lined up for this year as well. More opportunities then for new information. As always, I would like to provide you with a cursory overview of the Learning Thursdays educational series in general. A goal of Learning Thursdays is to support and help advance the educational and professional competency development of the treatment, prevention, and recovery workforce. A competency being comprised of knowledge, skills, and attitudes relative to a task. In part, we do this by offering monthly presentations that highlight content and topic areas that are current and relevant. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at the Learning Thursdays mailbox. If you are interested in offering a presentation, please contact us at the same mailbox as well. Okay. Now, as I noted earlier, Trish Allen and also Maria Picheri will take over from here. I will be back at the end of the presentation. Thank you for joining us, and ladies, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Patty. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. We are starting the first of 12 sessions titled Year in Ethics. Today we're going to talk about mandated reporting. As we've all been involved with the Justice Center since 2013, we have had an opportunity to gain a more global picture of the type of incidents that are occurring within our programs, and that has also offered us an opportunity to identify areas where we would like to work on education and improvement. What we have seen is that the purpose of the Justice Center of protecting those vulnerable populations and the ethical principles that our CASACs and individuals generally who work in our programs are very closely aligned. And so that's why this first topic that we're covering, which is mandated reporting, is actually so important. Mandated reporting is going to be a broad overview. So what I would like to do is discuss now the goals of the presentation, but before I do that, I'm actually going to ask my colleague to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Maria Picheri, and I'm the director of the Bureau of Addiction Treatment Centers for OASAS.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
Okay. So today we have a couple of goals. We are hoping to offer you the opportunity to understand the difference between reportable and non-reportable incidents, so basic overview, since there is a significant portion of our experience now that involves understanding and knowing when to report incidents. We're also going to discuss what constitutes a significant incident and discuss the role of mandated reporting and what that means to be a mandated reporter and what mandatory reporting is. And we are also going to touch briefly on when and how to use delayed discovery for reportable incidents, which is a very limited circumstance, which we will get to towards the middle of the presentation. We will talk briefly about the consequences of not making a report to the Justice Center, and also touch on reporting of suspected incidents to other entities. So that would be the SCR, State Central Register, regarding child abuse, as well as the SAFE Act. The overall goal of this specific training and all of these trainings together is to promote ethical leadership and to establish an ethical culture in addiction treatment programs. So what I'm going to touch on now are definitions, and there are quite a few of them, so I'm going to ask you to bear with me. The first is vulnerable person. Now, when we speak about a vulnerable person, we also speak about a service recipient. That's a person who, because of their physical or cognitive disability or a need for a service or replacement, they are within our program or our facility, provider, agency receiving services. In this case, I'm going to frequently refer to them as a service recipient or a patient because they are people in our program who are there for substance use disorder treatment. A mandated reporter is someone who is either a custodian or a human services professional. A custodian is a program director, an operator, an employee, a volunteer of a OASAS entity. It could also be someone who is contracted with an OASAS provider to provide services to a facility. They have to have regular and substantial contact with a service recipient or a vulnerable person. So that's the key thing, is a regular and substantial contact. But one thing that I will say is custodian may also include the people who are working in your program who are assisting with maintenance in the facility. It could be the student intern if they are hired by you to work in the program, volunteer, etc. So custodian is a pretty broad definition. Another item is human service professionals. So that includes people who are licensed, so doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers, district attorneys, investigators. And those are specific professions that fall within the category of human services professionals, but all of those human service professionals and custodians are mandated reporters or required to report incidents to the Justice Center VPCR. So when we talk about incident reporting, there is a requirement that our mandated reporters report incidents, and an incident is something that happens. It's an event or an accident or an injury, and it's during a program activity, and it involves a client, a custodian, or damage to the facility. It does not have to. It may have the potential to have an adverse effect on the service recipient. So when those circumstances are met, that must be reported to the Justice Center, or in certain cases, OASAS or other entities for additional follow-up. So there are a couple of different types of incidents. There's either a reportable incident, which means it's an incident of abuse or neglect, or a non-reportable incident. And the reportable incident also includes a significant incident, and we'll kind of unpack those a little bit later. And then there's a non-reportable incident, which is an item that you would not need to report, although one of the overall caveats that I will say, and I know my colleagues at the Justice Center also frequently say this as well, when in doubt, report. So just to a bit more defined, abuse is something that a custodian does. So remember, that's somebody who works at the agency, volunteers at the agency, or is maybe a contractor at the agency that has regular and substantial contact with a service recipient. So it's something that custodian does that has or is likely to result in harm to a service recipient. And neglect is something, an action or an inaction, a lack of attention. If a custodian had a duty that they failed to meet, so they breached that duty. Say a custodian had an obligation to conduct a bed check, but didn't. So that could be a form of neglect. And that is something that results in or could result in injury, or is likely to result in injury to a service recipient. And when I talk about injury or impairment, I'm talking about physical, emotional, psychological impairment to a service recipient. Okay, so there's a lot of words on the screen. Abuse and neglect, as a general category of incident, there's a couple of different types and a couple of different definitions associated with those types. So I'm going to run through them really quickly. Physical abuse, that would be something like punching someone, kicking someone, pushing someone. So it's something that caused an injury, or maybe you're not really sure what happened, but there is an injury and it's not explained. It's questionable how they got it. You know, if somebody has a bruise on their arm that looks like a handprint or something, you know, there's something about it that looks like it was caused by someone else. Psychological abuse, that's name calling or threatening someone, being really mean to them or making inappropriate gestures towards them. Sexual abuse, that's inappropriate touching, indecent exposure, sexual assault, taking or distributing sexually explicit pictures, voyeurism, other forms of sexual exploitation. I am going to say, just, you know, really briefly, Maria and I will be doing the next session on sexual misconduct and sexual abuse. So though I am mentioning that right now because it is a very key topic for us in terms of both incident reporting as well as ethics, we are not going to cover that very in depth during this first session. So I just wanted you guys to be aware of that so that you guys can know for future. So neglect, again, that's when the person who is a custodian fails to do something, should have done something and didn't. So if a service recipient wasn't being watched properly, if they were on one-to-one supervision and they weren't being watched, that would be kind of a version of neglect. It may be a failure to provide food or clothing or shelter, you know, some item that you should have provided that you maybe did not, or some service you should have provided that you maybe did not.
Another thing that we see is oftentimes there are reports that we're completing when we're doing that type of supervision. Some of the issues that have come up over the past couple years is that someone will write in their report that they've completed that type of supervision when in fact the cameras tell us that that person did not. So not only did the person not do what they were asked to do, their documentation was falsified as well.
Thank you, Maria. So another item that is considered a category of abuse and neglect is deliberate misuse of restraint or seclusion. So that's using excessive force or some sort of punishment to restrain a service recipient or you know, tie them down, some sort of punishment. And it's usually as punishment or for the convenience of staff. So that's something that I hope is not a frequent occurrence in our field, but I will raise that as one of the items that comes up. One item that we do see sometimes from time to time is actually controlled substances. So that's using or administering or providing any controlled substance contrary to law. Another is aversive conditioning. So that's where maybe like chili powder on the nails if someone's biting their nails or something. Some method to modify behavior or physical stimulus that's used to modify behavior so that somebody won't do a specific something without some person-specific legal authorization. And then obstruction. So obstruction is interfering with the discovery, reporting, or investigation of abuse and neglect, falsifying records, or intentionally making false statements. Now, I'm going to raise this one a little bit later on, refer back to it, but I did want to just provide you really briefly with the definition now. When we talk about incident reporting and mandated reporting, one of the biggest concerns, or one of the issues that can come up is if you fail to comply with your mandated reporting requirements, there is a possibility that there could be obstruction. You know, if you intentionally fail to report an incident, if you are trying to stop an investigation from being conducted, that could lead to an obstruction finding within a Justice Center investigation. So that is one thing that we are very, very cautious about, and one thing that we do want you to absolutely be aware of. Okay. So another type of incident, which I referenced earlier, is a significant incident. And that is something that it has a severity or a sensitivity that could result in or foreseeably result in harm to service recipient health, safety, or welfare of a person who's receiving services, but it's not something that was a abuse neglect. So, you know, just to kind of split out the hierarchy a little bit. One item that is a significant incident is an event that is or appears to be a crime under New York state law involving custodians, clients, or others, and that could be including children of service recipients in residential programs, and that's either as victims or as perpetrators. So one, I think, of the most common examples in our field is where there is an altercation, a physical altercation between two service recipients. Now, because it is a circumstance where the actor and the victim are both service recipients, that's not something that would be considered abuse and neglect. Abuse and neglect is something that's usually focused on a custodian as an actor and a service recipient as a victim. In this circumstance, we've got both of them service recipients, so that is something that would be a significant incident. Now, just because it's a significant incident doesn't mean it doesn't need to be reported. It still is reported into the VPCR, but then that becomes an investigation that falls to OASAS to conduct. Another form of a reportable significant incident would be a body cavity search. So that's something that's required with client consent. I will say that there is additional information if you need it for information on screens. So if you ever do have any questions about that, I would encourage you to reach out to us at OASAS, or you could inquire with field office for additional guidance. A third form of a significant incident is any violation of a client's rights to confidentiality, and that would be under 42 CFR Part 2 or under HIPAA. As we all know, we work with a very specific population, and they have additional protections for confidentiality under federal law. So we are very focused on protecting that right, and it's very important that we also are aware of and are constantly tracking and understanding where any type of breaches may occur at the program level and also at the state level. The next one is a missing client. So one clarifier that I will offer here is a missing client is not someone who has come up to you and said, I'm leaving, or is defined as having left AMA or ACA or against medical advice or against clinical advice. I think different programs use different words for that. That would be where you're actually looking for the patient. They're not where they're supposed to be. You have no understanding of where they may be. They didn't express any intent to leave. They are totally missing. So that is the one clarification I'll add there. Okay. The next type of a significant incident is a suicide attempt. Now, these I want to differentiate just a little bit. This is where someone has actively attempted, whether or not they've said that it was their intent to try and commit suicide, but it's not just if they are saying that they want to commit suicide, it's the active attempt. Statement of intent to commit suicide is something that should be recorded in the patient's clinical record, absolutely. But if it's solely a statement of intent, that doesn't quite rise to the level of a significant incident. Okay. I think this is the final one, is death of a custodian or a mandated reporter during the course of his or her job duties related to the provider facility. So my caveat here is, if you need to call the police to report that a death has occurred, absolutely do that. My colleagues at the Justice Center and I both strongly encourage you, if there's an emergency, to call 911 first. We at OASAS or the Justice Center through the VPCR is not going to be able to send an ambulance from Albany to wherever you are located throughout the state. So if there is some other entity, law enforcement or emergency services that you need to contact, absolutely, please contact them first. Also, for these circumstances, death of a custodian or a mandated reporter, please also call the Justice Center to report that. That is a significant incident. I will also add, though it's not on the slide, but I would like to reference it anyway, is reporting a death. There has been somewhat of a change in the process for reporting a death that's occurred. The requirement is now that a death of a service recipient that occurs on premises at an inpatient or a bedded service, that needs to be reported. And it's the death of a service recipient either there or within 30 days of the date of discharge. That does not apply where it's an outpatient service, unless, of course, the person passed away while on program premises or during the context of program activity. Okay, so this is just going to be a broad overview of incident reporting generally. So the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it. When to report. A mandated reporter must report an incident immediately upon discovery. And I will say that that sentence has brought up a lot of questions. I would say absolutely a lot of questions.
I also think, though, what's important is the person who actually seen the incident does the call. Oftentimes we're finding that an incident occurs and then a day or two later it's the supervisor, the program director that's making the call. So I think it's important to remember whoever has witnessed the event that they make the call to the Justice Center, because they are the first line to talk about the incident and review what happened.
Absolutely. And when we talk about incident reporting and mandated reporting, I'm stealing this from someone else that I heard say this, but I really appreciated it. The obligation to report, that's a personal obligation. That is your obligation to call into the Justice Center or use the web form or the phone, or I think there's an app now for your phone as well. That is your personal obligation. There are certain limited circumstances where you are able to do group reporting, but by and large, what we do encourage is that you reach out directly and report as soon as you hear of an incident or make a discovery of an incident. Now, discovery, that's an interesting term. We've gotten a lot of questions about that. And what I can say is when you discover an incident, maybe a service recipient comes up to you and says, I don't know, a staff member, John Doe, spoke really harshly to me. He said some stuff I didn't really think was appropriate. I'm not sure what to do about it. So they've told you that something has happened. I will say that a incident does not need to be independently verified for you to report it. And again, if you have any doubt whatsoever, report it. I've myself done incident reports into the VPCR. It's not an overly burdensome process. It's pretty easy to go through. The triage folks work with people really well to help you through the process if you're doing the phone calls. And I always strongly encourage, if you just aren't sure, then absolutely use whatever mode of reporting available to you, but just report. But so the official definition of discovery is you have direct knowledge of an incident and reasonable cause to suspect that a person receiving services has been subject to a reportable incident that's required to be reported to the VPCR. So you have direct knowledge that a service recipient was the subject of an abuse, neglect, or a significant incident. But the question that comes up a lot is discovery. How do I know I've discovered? So you have reasonable cause to suspect that a service recipient has been subjected to a reportable incident, either through something that you saw, maybe somebody come up and told you, somebody provides you with an explanation that just doesn't seem to fit, or some other type of notice that gives you reasonable cause to suspect that a service recipient was subjected to a reportable incident. One thing I will say is there are circumstances where you've heard the service recipient has identified that something has occurred, and John Doe wasn't in the building that day, or maybe something that your observation tells you that maybe there's something missing. So do you have the ability to question, hey, was John Doe in the building that day? that I think is a case-by-case basis. You need to evaluate the discovery, have you discovered something? And you need to really kind of determine whether or not you have direct knowledge of an incident or if you've developed reasonable cause to suspect. The one thing that I will caution is any type of delay in discovery, unless it's under extremely limited circumstances, you absolutely should be reporting that immediately or as soon as possible. I will touch on one thing that I have seen, which is when you're reporting an incident and it's the end of the day, that's always, it can be frustrating if something happens and it's 5 minutes before your shift ends. But, when we say immediately, we absolutely do mean immediately. Another thing that I have kind of questioned is I recognize there may be times where you're just not sure if something is an incident or, maybe you just want somebody's second opinion. So reach out to your supervisor every once in a while. Absolutely. There are some really interesting cases that aren't definite whether or not there's some sort of incident that needs to be reported. However, we do not expect that it's a standard process every time an incident occurs that you are reaching out to your supervisor and the supervisor is reporting the incident into the Justice Center. I think fails to fulfill the obligation for every individual to complete their mandated reporting.
If you're also going to delay, then the one thing that the guidance tells us to do is note what happened and the reason you're holding off on the reporting. So there is some documentation that you have to do immediately.
Yes. Okay. So this is just kind of going over the definition of reasonable cause to suspect. So I kind of touched on this briefly, but it's not conclusive as evidence. It's not a videotape. It's not, 3 people saying absolutely this happened. Although that's great. If you have 3 people or a videotape that's showing you that an incident occurred, by all means, that's definitely reasonable cause to suspect. But it should not hinge on having those 3 people corroborating or that video evidence before you report an incident. So essentially, it's a rational or sensible suspicion is sufficient. So it's what you've seen, training you may have had in the past, whatever it is that identifies to you that something has occurred. One item that we do see every once in a while come up is delayed discovery. Now, Maria spoke about this briefly, and I'm going to touch upon the requirements for this. The one thing that I think is most crucial is that this is not an opportunity to not report at all. Delayed discovery is solely where the person who makes the allegation of abuse neglect, they have some prior history of making false reports of abuse neglect, and no other person has said that they've seen this happen. Another circumstance where this could happen is the person who's making the allegation, they have a behavioral or psychological condition, something that lends them to make false reports or to perhaps misperceive or misunderstand a circumstance. So it's those are the 2 circumstances where you are permitted to delay discovery. Now, absolutely, without bar, you are still required to reach out to OASAS and say, I'm going to delay discovery. But you absolutely should reach out to your field office person first before you take any other steps to try and develop a more reasonable suspicion of what's occurred. Maybe some additional steps. Looking back to the example that I gave, John Doe, look at the logs for that week. Was he working that week? If you happen to know that John Doe was on vacation for that week, that's possible, an indicator that that incident did not occur when that service recipient said that it did. So those are the only 2 circumstances where they may be delayed. The other thing I will say is the delay is only for 24 hours. This is not a, hold off for a week or 2 weeks and develop a fuller understanding of whatever the circumstances were where this allegation stems from, solely for 24 hours, just so you can do a preliminary review to determine whether or not there's some indication that this occurred. And the other thing that I will say is that you absolutely have to document the reason why the delay. And I will say that anecdotally, we at OASAS, we see pretty much every single incident that comes through. We look at it and we do notice if there's some sort of delay. So, absolutely pay attention with reporting, and we strongly encourage you not to delay reporting. Anything? Okay, so one other item that I'll just touch on really quickly, that's multiple reports. So when a group of staff are together and they've seen an incident, or maybe you're all standing together and a service recipient comes up and tells you John Doe was really mean to me, or John Doe hit me, or whatever the allegation is, and you're all standing there and you hear it. So do you all have to report? Now, earlier I did state that every mandated reporter has a personal obligation to report. There are provisions within the regulations that provide for group reporting, or for one person to report for multiple people, and that provision states that that's only okay where that person knows that the incident has in fact been reported to the VPCR, and that they themselves have been named in that prior report as a person with knowledge of the incident. So Jane Doe called the Justice Center and said, I've just heard an allegation against John Doe. They're not married. This is just a fact pattern that I'm using because I can't think of another last name. So John Doe and Jane Doe not married. Jane Doe reported, and John Smith was there, and Jane Doe tells the Justice Center John Smith was there. John Smith heard all of the allegations, and lists out the details of the incident. So that would be something that would fall within the language within our regulations for multiple reports to be called in using a single report. Okay, so I'm now going to turn it over to Maria.
Thank you.
She is going to cover some other reporting circumstances.
Okay, besides the Justice Center, there are a couple other regulations that require you to report. And the first one we're going to talk about is the SAFE Act. The SAFE Act is an act that was amended by the New York State Mental Hygiene Law. And it added new reporting requirements for mental health professionals. And those really include physicians, psychologists, registered nurse, and licensed clinical social workers. So this went into effect in 2013, and basically what it is doing is a mental health professional currently providing treatment services to an individual must make a report to authorities if in fact there's some sort of threat. If they conclude using reasonable professional judgment that this individual is going to engage in conduct that will result in serious harm to self or others. So in doing this, the report has to come from the mental health professional and then sent down to county officials first. They have to agree with the assessments, and then the officials input the names into the state database. The information is retained for 5 years, and if authorities find the person in the database has a gun permit necessary to purchase a handgun in New York State, they are required to revoke that license and seize any guns. So people that are in the database are barred from attaining any permit until their names are purged. So in that case, the SAFE Act really can assist when someone is making an untoward threat towards someone. For example, we had a particular incident where a patient made a threat against a Department of Social Services worker, a very serious threat. And it was found that there were available guns to that individual if he were to leave the program. And so in following the SAFE Act, we were able to successfully intervene with the patient and provide them the necessary mental health care, as well as informing the Department of Social Services worker in assuring his safety. So it does play a very valuable role in gun violence. And we have a commitment to provide that when we hear that in our sessions, in our group sessions or our individual sessions. The second area is not new. It's the child abuse reporting. And that is, first of all, to understand that maltreatment refers to the quality of care a child is receiving from those responsible for him or her. Maltreatment can occur when a parent or another person legally responsible for the care of a child harms a child or places a child in imminent danger of harm by failing to exercise the minimum degree of care in providing that child with anything such as food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care, and when financially able to do so. Maltreatment can also result from abandonment of a child or for not providing adequate supervision for that child. Further, a child may be maltreated if a parent engages in the excessive use of drugs or alcohol such that it interferes with their ability to adequately supervise the child. And so it's really important that we report that and understand that regardless of the fact that someone does have an alcohol or substance abuse problem, that they have a responsibility to supervise children. Reporting misconduct is also an issue. Oftentimes, our colleagues are hesitant to report. They fear retaliation. They don't want their colleagues to be upset with them. They want to just stay out of it. And that's a problem that addresses one of those areas that we talked about in abuse and neglect, which is obstruction. So not reporting for a lot of different reasons is a problem with the Justice Center. So in reporting misconduct, all professionals encounter wrongdoing by their colleagues. Decisions about whether to blow the whistle in these situations can be among the most difficult ethical dilemmas that a practitioner faces.
You know, Maria, I'm just going to jump in right quick here, and I'm going to say one thing. For those people who are credentialed by the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, so if you hold a CASAC or a credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor certification or credential, there actually is included within the provision of ethics, and this is something that when we talk about mandated reporting, it's actually multiple layers. So for people who are credentialed by OASAS, there is an obligation for you to report your colleague's misconduct, and that is one of the central tenets. Similar to attorneys, you know, it's a self-policing profession to some extent, and there is a ethical obligation on everyone's part to ensure that where there has been some misconduct, that is reported to OASAS Credentialing. And I think that we are very sensitive to the fact that it can be quite a struggle to report. You know, these are our colleagues. In some instances, it feels like a family. You guys work together. It's a high-stress environment. Clearly, we are working in a very high-stakes field and working diligently to try and help the service recipients get to recovery, sustained recovery. So it can be a very difficult experience to know of a colleague's misconduct and how to report that. But you know, I think we want to walk through opportunities to address that and how supervisors as well as individuals can work through that and become more okay with having to report.
So on the surface, it seems real easy. It seems like, well, I saw something, I have to report it. I have an obligation to my credential. I have an obligation to the patient. Yet it's very difficult. And so what we want to discuss here today is there are many shades of gray that people go through in terms of making those decisions whether to report or not. And we wanted to open that up, give you some feedback around that and some ways that you can supervise your staff. So why do people not report? There's rationale for not reporting and what people feel in terms of stepping forward. So the first one is they might think that the allegations are hearsay. They're therefore unreportable. I'm not sure if it's true, and we know with the Justice Center it doesn't have to be. If it's an allegation, it will get vetted out in terms of the subsequent activities that we do in order to find out whether or not it's true. So that's one reason. Also concerned over confidentiality, either among the professional or the patient relationship or among colleagues. We have this commitment to confidentiality, and we feel that we're breaking it if we do report. Also, there's a risk of defamation of character. What if the accusation is false? Now I've disrupted the program, I've disrupted the patient, I've disrupted my colleague, and it was wrong. Also, protection of a colleague's reputation. That person might have 20 years in the field, and that particular report is unnecessary. They've given a lot to the field. I really can't move forward in trying to report this. So protecting your colleague's reputation is also a strong pull that someone has. Also, fear of retaliation or perceived as a tattletale or a snitch. Many of us don't want to be in that position, and so we're reluctant to get involved. And then we're also disloyal to our team of colleagues. We're the person who stepped forward and caused all this havoc in the program and for that person. These are the things that are important to discuss in supervision. The supervisory relationship is extremely important in talking to your staff, and even after they report, helping them understand the feelings that they are having as a result of reporting. So the supervisory relationship is extremely important when reporting misconduct. If you don't report misconduct, there are a lot of risks involved with that. First of all, the patient can experience a physical injury or be compromised medically, including death. Patients can also experience psychological harm, including depression and suicide. Also, the perpetrator can reoffend and affect multiple individuals in a variety of agencies. So you may terminate them and say, they can't work at this particular organization, but then they move on and go to another organization, and we often hire people who have had serious instances of misconduct. So it's really important to know that we want to be able to stop that behavior, and if this person is not appropriate for this field, then we need to make those decisions along with the Justice Center.
And if I can just break in there, because that is, I think, a very crucial point. So termination of staff is not enough. In my role working with the Justice Center, both on the incident side and as well as on the oversight and monitoring side, so that's post determination in an abuse neglect case, what happens. A lot of what we see is that staff member has been terminated. And it could be for significant incidents as well. The termination, that's employer-employee determination, so I'm not going to opine upon that. If you believe that someone in your program has done something inappropriate, then that is, as an employer, absolutely your decision. My concern, and what I think I will always say, especially when it comes to Justice Center incident reporting as well as reporting to OASAS Credentialing, it is crucial that an incident be reported if you have a concern, because remember, at the end of the day, we are working for the service recipients. Our jobs, our focus is helping people get better. And if we know of someone who has taken action or done something, committed some conduct that endangers that, we are currently in an epidemic which has some very steep consequences. We have people who may leave our programs and they could die, and that is a very scary thought, and that's why it's so crucial that we pay attention to and work towards ensuring that they are protected from any sort of inappropriate behavior or any type of damaging incidents that could derail their recovery. And you know, at the end of the day, we're here just like the Justice Center to protect vulnerable individuals. We're working at it from a different angle because we're trying to get them, we're trying to address their addiction, but at the end of the day, that is our overall goal, is to address vulnerable individuals. And while I can understand termination and you know, think it's absolutely a viable option, there is a similar requirement, both ethically and as people working together in this field, that we make sure we take additional steps, report it to the Justice Center, take that extra step and file a complaint with credentialing, so that in addition to them no longer working at that program, there are other processes going on to ensure that they are not able to re-offend or commit an act again and injure another service recipient.
Okay. Another risk is that it puts the agency in a liable position to be sued. So it's really important that the actions that we take don't have any cause of harm to our patients. Also, programs are at risk for sanctions. They can lose their license to operate if the situation is extremely serious and problematic in terms of how the agency as well as the staff responded to a particular patient issue. And last but not least, as we've talked about before, failure to report misconduct or assisting with investigations will put you at risk for a reportable incident of obstruction. So how are we going to overcome our reluctance to report? We have some steps here that will help you as a person and as well as a supervisor assisting someone in making a report. Helping professionals must become familiar with the reporting requirements of the state, especially the Justice Center, as well as the SAFE Act and the child abuse reporting. So it is really important as healthcare professionals that we know what the regulations are. We can't state that we don't know what they are and we didn't report because we didn't know it. It is part of our job to know it. Also, we need to seek and understand the situation. You have to talk about your feelings in a way that will help you make that report. You might want to talk about how afraid you are. You might want to talk about what are the implications to the rest of the team. What are the implications to the person who's being reported about? And talking about that in supervision may give you that strength you need to take that next step to making a report. Also, you have to look at all options to fulfill the duty to report. Expose the conduct, including reporting to your supervisor, administrative staff, if you have an ethics officer, and the Justice Center. So taking a look at all those options, you still have to take that step forward in making that report to the Justice Center. And last but not least, decide on the best option as the first step, knowing that you will have the support of the agency. So you will have the support of your agency as well as the support of OASAS in doing what is right. What we did last year, and I wanted to share this with the ATCs, we were able to have a year in ethics last year in 2016. And our goal was to create an ethical culture. And in doing these 12 topics, we were able to become more intimately involved in understanding the broad aspects of ethics that go beyond just the codes. So what we put together here today is how you can establish an ethical culture in your agency. Now, there was a significant study that was published in 2013 that influenced ethical leadership and the incidence of employees reporting ethical misconduct. And it was found that two factors influenced that reporting. The first one being that employees' social environment. So the environment that the person is actually working at has a direct effect on ethical behavior and ethical reporting. And also, what's important is their supervisors and coworkers, because everyone's watching what the other is doing. So it is real important that your ethical culture begins at the top, because the stronger the ethical supervision and the ethical behaviors, that continues throughout your particular program or agency. Results also indicate that a supervisor who is perceived to be stronger on ethical leadership will be more encouraging of such reporting behaviors. So a comfortable supervisor is one who helps staff feel safe in making those reports. And strong ethical leaders will also serve as an ethical role model for employees. Ethical leadership. Given their formal authority, employees are likely to see supervisors as credible models. Your behavior as a supervisor is critical in how your employees act. Employees observe behaviors of their supervisors and often emulate them. They do that both positively and negatively as well. In addition to direct role modeling, ethical leaders influence behavior by setting standards and holding their direct reports accountable. And that's really important. Accountability is a critical value in how individuals lead. Ethical leaders are more likely to set expectations for reporting and support employees who do this. And I can't emphasize enough the support piece, because oftentimes we will give them directives to make that call to the Justice Center, but our role as supervisors is to touch back with that particular staff person, ask how they're feeling, ask if they need anything from us, so that they feel supported in making that report. And employees are more likely to report unethical conduct if their supervisor is stronger on ethical leadership, because such a supervisor would be more likely to role model ethical conduct, expect reporting, and support reporting when it occurs. I want to first talk about the social environment, because that was one of the factors that was addressed in this particular study. And the social environment can enhance or it can suppress reporting for unethical behaviors. So employees find themselves in a complex environment where they look for multiple staff for cues. And we always have very strong staff in our teams that do a lot of talking all the time. And there are quieter staff that we have on our teams that tend to look at what those dynamics are. And as counselors, we're always looking at the group dynamics in general. So it's up to the supervisor to begin to mold and direct those individuals who are very strong, who give their opinions right away, as well as those who are listening and trying to pick up information. Employees are less likely to blow the whistle if they believe significant others in their work environment may retaliate against them. So let's go back to the loud, strong employee who does something maybe loud and strong to a patient. That person who saw that is going to be less likely to report that, because the strength that person seems to have on the team and the fear that they have if that person were to find out they were the person who reported them. Employees also look to their coworkers for cues about appropriate and inappropriate behavior, including reporting. And employees are most likely to look at coworkers for ethical guidance and support. And that just tells us that they're going to go to their coworkers before they go to their supervisor. So it's in having that strong team that allows the good message to get to those who are asking questions. Now I have a couple graphs for you in this particular situation, and if you take a look at this particular graph, you'll see the red bars are the high coworker ethical behavior, then the blue bar is the low ethical behavior. On the axes here, we have reporting unethical conduct internally. And down below, we're taking a look at both types of coworkers. So this kind of gives you a sense of what's happening here. So if you look at the first set of bars, you see that the low supervisory ethical leadership and the high coworker ethical behavior is not as high as the high supervisory ethical leadership. So even people who are individuals and coworkers who have high ethical behavior do better in an environment where the leader is ethical and that conducts his or herself ethically. If we look then at the fear of retaliation, and fear of retaliation is on the vertical part of this axis, and you're looking at the low supervisory ethical leadership, you'll see that the fear of retaliation is greater in those individuals who are in a low supervisory ethical leadership environment. And if you look at the high supervisory ethical leadership, then you'll see that it looks like in this particular case that low ethical behavior from coworkers, the retaliation fear is even higher. So in instances where there is high supervisory ethical leadership, you'll find that there's increased fear of retaliation from those individuals who have low ethical behavior, as well as there's less fear from those individuals who are high coworker ethical behavior. So in general, it really does take a village, not merely an ethical leader to encourage employees to report on ethical conduct, it's everyone.
And I think that we will speak about this more, and actually there is another Learning Thursday, I believe, that's available that speaks to clinical supervision. But when we talk about it takes a village and how it's a group effort to really instill an environment where people are comfortable reporting and feel they will be supported in the aftermath when they have reported an incident, we can't stress enough the importance of clinical supervision as a tool to instill that in that environment and with each of your individual employees. It's also a great tool to check in with employees. And maybe it's not about a specific incident that they reported, but just to generally understand the environment that they're in, what they're seeing, and how they're feeling about that work environment. So with that, we thank you for joining us today, and we will now turn it over to our colleague, Patty.
Ladies, thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in February when Tricia and Maria will be back to continue the Learning Thursdays Year of Ethics. Thank you and enjoy your day.